Yeah, and I think another thing that I've encountered is people talking about kind of what Neil is saying here, that you can't get mythicism through any kind of academic press or any kind of academic thing, but they complain about the whole blacklisting and or whatever. He's saying we don't actually complain about that, like because we like the mythicist hypothesis has been.
Yeah, you and I don't as much. It gets complained about on the internet. Let's come up, right?
Yeah.
People have made this argument, and it's sort of true. Like Brody is a classic example. Like he got shut down, he got censored for daring to do this, and I think that would clearly be true for anyone in a religious institution. We have a lot of scholars who've gotten like fired for way more trivial claims than Jesus didn't exist, right? So that's happened recently, like in the last like 5 years. There've been many like big cases of this happening, but only at religious. Yeah, Lacona. There have been others. Well, I think Litwa as well, right? So
yes, most recently I think is Litwa.
Yeah, so that happens. That's true. But usually when it's correctly framed, and Chrissy Hansen does sometimes correctly frame this, which is when you're looking at secular institutions like Princeton, it's technically secular enough to count for this point. Or where Ehrman teaches, for example, North Carolina, where like those, I don't think you would get fired for being a mythicist, like at all, right? I think there are ways that your peers could punish you and make your life difficult, but they couldn't get you fired. However, that's what I believe. Not only do I think, but I also know that a lot of these scholars perceive it to be otherwise. And a good example is Paul Davies or Philip Davies. Philip Davies? It's a Davies. I'm forgetting. There's a Paul Davies and a Philip Davies. I think I mean Philip Davies. You can find it on my website. Look for Davies, Davies. Philip. Sorry, Philip.
I've got that post pulled up right here, and I'm actually going to put it in the.
Yeah. So Philip Davies was corresponding with both me and Lataster before he died, and he came out to us as a mythicist. He said, "I'm skeptical, at best agnostic, right?" And but he said, like, I don't, and he was retired, like he couldn't even be fired. But he said, like, it would cause too much grief, like people would harass, trouble him, and like it would cause like hits to his reputation and things like that to come out as a mythicist. And so he could only be outed after he was dead, when he could no longer be punished. But he wasn't worried about being fired. But he did perceive that there would be backlash and harassment and stress and anxiety thrown on him, basically prejudice thrown at him for suggesting this. And he did, that perception kept him quiet. And that's a fact, right? So this is a reality. This does happen. I think the perception does not align with reality. I think Davies was excessively fearful. I don't think the consequences would have been as bad as he thought they were. But of course, it's the panopticon, right? Like, all you have to do is believe that the consequences will be bad, and that's enough to shut you down, right? Enough to steer you to talk about other things, to avoid the topic, to treat it with kid gloves, see it as a third rail. So creating that atmosphere is a problem. And this was happening right at the beginning when I first published, and Ehrman came out saying, like, no one who thinks this can get hired anywhere, which is a veiled threat, right? Mm-hmm. He outright said that. And James McGrath agreed with him. Like, he said, yeah, you'll get fired. You won't get hired. Like, if you do this. It's like, you're basically trying to use the ad baculum, right? You're trying to say that you're trying to tell everybody else they can't be mythicists or they won't get hired. That's coercion, right? Like that's exactly they're trying to create the perception that there's this backlash. And that's exactly what happened when Thomas Thompson came out with his peer-reviewed defense of the fact that the Moses and the patriarchs were not historical. Everybody tried to destroy his career. And then everybody told everybody else that if anybody sides with him, they're going to go after them, right? Like, so it became that kind of atmosphere. Now, it was mostly perception more than reality. And gradually over time, as younger generation came up of scholars and they didn't buy into this prestige economy argument anymore, and they just seriously looked at the evidence and they said, actually, he's making kind of a good case. And then within about 20 years, his view is now the mainstream, right? So, but at first he was treated exactly like I'm being treated and exactly like other mythicists are being treated. It's the exact same story. It's the playbook coming out all over again. So I do make this point, but I do think it can get exaggerated, this idea that, oh, you'll automatically get fired. I don't think that's true. I also don't think necessarily that you'll be punished for it. I do think the difficulties could be created for someone if they come out, but they have to be ready to face those difficulties. And the analogy I give for this is I did a series of reviews on female philosophers many years ago, atheist philosophers, so women who were atheists and professional philosophers. And I did these reviews of them, interviews, did these interviews with them. They're published on my blog. But there were a number, at this time, this was like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I can't remember exactly. At that time, I had a number of women who turned me down because they explained to me pretty much the same terms that I'm already taking enough shit for being a woman in philosophy. If I start putting a target on my back by being an outspoken atheist as well, that doubles the amount of shit I have to deal with. And so they would rather just do the epistemology or whatever other things they're doing. They don't want to be known as like the atheist philosopher, because being known as the woman philosopher was already a problem, and they were facing so much prejudice from that. And it's not like they're being fired because they're a woman. It's just they're dealing with a lot of shit. There's a lot of problems, not being taken seriously, that kind of stuff, and being harassed more, being criticized more. And so coming out as an atheist would double that. Right. And so it's just why double all your grief when you can just do the things you want to do and you just stay away from that issue. And I think the same thing happens with historicism. I think there's a lot of scholars who might have their own opinions about it or don't, but they don't, and they know that to have opinion, they got to research it. And so researching it is work. I don't care about that enough, and it's going to cause grief that I'll have to deal with. Why to deal with the grief? I want to go study my own little thing. I don't need to deal with it. So I do think this sort of hostility, this sort of mocking of mythicists, this denigrating them, this sort of saying they can't get hired, saying they're cranks, saying they're crazy. All of that stuff creates a social atmosphere that creates a disinterest in wanting to touch the subject, rather than saying, yeah, this is serious. You should take this seriously, but I think it's wrong. That attitude would actually allow scholars the breathing room and freedom to be more honest and open about what they think about this, and to spend more time looking into it rather than avoiding it as a third rail issue. So by the critics of mythicism turning it into a third rail issue, they are creating the very phenomenon that they are complaining about, essentially, right? And so I do think that that's real, but I do think on the internet it often gets exaggerated, the degree to which someone can be punished or fired for this. But I do think the atmosphere exists, and I do think it's people like Chrissy Hansen who are creating that atmosphere, and I do not think that that's ethical, and I think that is a problem in the field.